right, so we're looking at Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche is born in 1844. He dies in 1900. So 1844 to 1900. So some quick math. How old was he when he died?
44, 66.
Close. 56. We'll split the difference between 46 and 66. He's 56 years old. He didn't write, though, until the end of his life. In 1889, I talked about before, he had kind of a mental breakdown in 1889. And after that, he stopped writing. So it was so bad that he was catatonic for the rest of his life. If you remember the story, he is walking down a street, and he sees that there's a horse and a carriage, and the horse won't move. So this guy's going over and he's whipping the horse, trying to get the horse to move, and the horse refuses to move. The harder he whips the horse, it actually seems, the more he just kind of stands. So Nietzsche sees this scene, and he goes running over to the guy and like shoves him away, and he goes and he gives the horse a big hug, and he's crying to the horse, "I understand you, I understand you." And then he kind of has a slip from consciousness, and he ends up in a catatonic state for the rest of his life. He never emerges from it for the last 11 years of his life. So now he begs this question, why is it that we bother to study this guy? And why does I talk about him so much? One reason to study him, if nothing else, is that his influence is absolutely massive on a lot of different studies, not just in philosophy. It's in literature, it's in sociology, it's in psychology, especially psychology. It's even in the sciences. This guy's influence is immeasurable. I mean, you can almost gauge the modern world, the modern world of thought, certainly before Nietzsche and after Nietzsche. It's that deep. And it's quite amazing since the guy didn't write like hundreds of books. The guy wrote a few books, but the books that he wrote are so incredibly dense, and there's so much that's there that, I mean, you could spend a lifetime just trying to sort through those things. And I know this. I've been reading him since junior high school, still kind of piecing some things together about him. Another reason to study him is, again, just because of his influence, but his influence over world events. Remember World War II? You've heard of it before? That was him, in a sense. It wasn't actually his fault. When he goes to a catatonic state, his sister takes over kind of control of his books and everything, and she comes across a bunch of stuff that he wrote but never published. She went through and she re-edits some stuff to make it sound very nationalistic, which, by the way, Nietzsche was completely anti-nationalist, very anti-Semitic, although in his other works, Nietzsche wrote very positively about Jews. And she takes this nationalist, anti-Semitic stuff, and she presents it to the leaders of the National Socialist Party in Germany, and says, "Hey, you're creating all this nationalist stuff about music and literature. You need a Nazi philosopher. Here's the man. It's my brother." And he died years ago, and so Nietzsche got blamed a lot for the thought processes of World War II, which we're going to find. For example, the idea of the Superman, or the superior person. It wasn't until, like the 1960s or so, where a bunch of his stuff got published into English, that people were able to go back and look at it and go, that's not what he was saying. And then we could look at just his published works. But also a great reason to study him is because, a lot like Socrates, he's a guy who believed that philosophy shouldn't just be like a critique of words by means of other words, as some people said. Philosophy shouldn't just be a bunch of us sitting around critiquing what we say and not ever doing anything with it. Philosophy is something that should be used instead to facilitate the growth of the individual, a tool that we use to examine ourselves. Psychology we can use, true. Philosophy as well, though, to develop ourselves. Psychoanalysis will look at what it is that we are. Philosophy should guide us towards what it is that we possibly could be if we sort ourselves out in these ways. And so, it facilitates the growth of the individual. So, questions? Okay, by facilitating the growth of the individual, what he means is it leads us towards an approach to life that affirms life. It's life affirming, meaning it's a good thing to live. It's a good thing to live, and he explains why. So, questions so far? Easy. So, it's important to notice that Nietzsche says he's not writing for the masses. He's not writing for most people, which is a strange thing, again, to kind of begin your writing by saying, this isn't for most of you. This is for the smart people, basically what he'll begin by saying. Now, if I come in here and said to you, this isn't for all of you, this is for just the smart people. Think about the effect that we have there. I wonder how many of you sit there and go, oh, just the smart people? Okay. Let me know when I can start paying attention again. Very few people. We would probably go, okay, the smart people, that's me. What's he got to say? You know, but I don't think he uses this rhetorically at all. I think he really does mean that. And the audience that he's specifically writing for are the group of, he calls that the higher man, the higher person. This is Nietzsche's audience. So who is that person, the higher man? It's the person who becomes the master of the chaos inside of themselves. It's the master of the chaos that he is. This is his idea of a life mission, to master the chaos that's inside of you. It's the person who seeks their individual status, apart from the group, instead their individual status, to maximize who it is that they could be. That's the person who sets out to eliminates any sense of like collective identity. This is the person who eliminates any idea of belonging to a mass of people, but says wholly, entirely individual. Self-sufficient in themselves, doesn't need others, but instead just seeks to become everything in themselves, their own judges, we could say, of good and evil. The idea being that we are beyond good and evil when we're at that point. It's a recognition that people are chaotic beings, and that if you recognize that, seeking to kind of control that, and it means that you're always going to be at war with yourself. You will always be at war with yourself, but it's the person who's trying to overcome themselves in this way, if that makes sense. In other words, you can look at what you are. And largely what we are things that society has made us. Like, for example, if I were to ask you, what's wrong with stealing? What's wrong with cheating? What's wrong with murder? What's wrong with any of these kinds of things? Oftentimes what we have to fall back and rest on is just, well, this is what society tells us. Now, society exists essentially to perpetuate itself. Let that sink in. Society exists essentially to perpetuate itself. Society does not do well with people who separate themselves out from it. You know, it's something that exists simply to perpetuate itself. So the morality that it uses is exactly that. It's something that's used to sustain the masses. Okay? So what I want you to get from that is that the higher man is the person who sets themselves out from society. That's the person who goes up into the mountain. That's the person who self-reflects. And that's the person who asks kind of these really deep questions. Things like, why do I live? You know, why do I suffer? Now this person is contrasted by the massive people here, the herd. Bless you. And so what does the herd use to control people? The herd uses herd morality. You know, essentially it's a collection of people who get together and create a morality that essentially leads society around by the nose, if you would. It convinces the weak masses that your weakness is a virtue. So for example, I'm sure you've heard these kinds of things before, like we all get so much more done together. You know, together we get so much more done. Yeah, I suppose if you're someone who doesn't do much. You know, think about group work. Okay? So in every group you've got that one person who has the A and really works hard. You've got that middle group which is mediocre, maybe, where they're like, well, maybe we'll get some stuff done, but they're going to be late on it. It's going to be, you know, kind of half-assed done, not too great. And you've got that one person, you know, that F student who just doesn't really care much. You know, on the phone, has the, you know, whatever, isn't participating in things. Maybe you don't even assign them any work because you know they're not going to do anything anyway. And so what's going to happen to the group grade? Is the A student going to settle for less than an A? No, they'll get the A work done. And then the middle performing students, they'll get to go along with it. And then the F student, who is only an F student for lack of effort, not because of lack of brains, not because of lack of ability, but because of a lack of effort. So now they all get A's. And then as teachers, we sit back and go, see, we get so much more done together. No, we don't. No, we don't. 3 of the 4 people got more done together in terms of getting a grade, but it's always the one person who stands out above, and then the other people who get to go along. So now what you see is that society creates this morality that centers around the idea that we all get so much more done together. It looks at weakness as a virtue. You know, if there's something wrong with us, then that's a good thing. Why? Because if you're weak, then you need a society around you to prop you up. We like that. You know, we like the idea that we need each other. If you're the person who stands beyond it, well, you don't like the idea of needing other people. You like the idea of being self-sufficient. If you're not that person, well then absolutely, we like to ride the coattails of others. Now, Nietzsche points out that this is a very dangerous approach, not just because it trashes society, and then not just because it limits the growth of the higher man, but also because it limits our growth. In other words, what we're seeking to do in that case there is to limit suffering or to limit challenges as best as we possibly can, to avoid those things, and essentially just to get by in life. But Nietzsche is going to point out that's not how it is that you become better in life. How do you become better? Well, you suffer, as he's going to point out. So, herd instinct is the thing that teaches us that weakness is actually virtue. Oh, by the way, you see this, I'm sure, as guides in this classroom. What are you supposed to be in society right now? No, harmless, right? Because remember, your very nature is toxic. So we have to eliminate all this toxicity that you young men are bringing into society. We have to kind of suppress those primal instincts of yourself. So I'm going to see how well this has happened to you, all right? So be good boys and give the right answers. Otherwise, we'll have to report you. If you're walking down the hallway and someone punches you in the face, what are you supposed to do?
Punch him back.
No, don't punch him back, you toxic jerk. What are you supposed to do? Go find an adult. That's right. So you come in here and you say, Scanlon, someone just punched me in the face. I'll clutch the pearls. They, what? In our society? I'll go out there and I'll ask somebody, did you just bully this young? Bam! So then now me and that student go down, and what are we going to do? What's that? We need to go find an administrator, which, by the way, is the email that we got last week. As teachers, we're not allowed to break up fights anymore. We have to go find an administrator. So I hope you ain't losing too bad if I see you. Hands up! I'll be back! Where are they all? And so we have to go, yes, I'm not joking, I can show you the email. And so now we have to go find an administrator. So we find an administrator, and we bring Salazar back. And then Salazar was like, hey, what did you just? And that person now punches Salazar. Now all three of us are sitting there. This guy's a jerk, man. Toxic. So now what do? No, excuse you. That is so uncivilized of you all. What is it we're supposed to do? I guess in a sense we're going to gang up. We have to go call the police now. Go find a real adult to handle the situation for us. And then I go to the next teacher meeting and teachers are going to say, I heard you got punched in the face. But I was very brave about it. And then teachers will say, wow, he exercised such restraint. He was the bigger person there. Was I the bigger person? Because of me, Salazar got punched in the face. If I had handled the situation, then that wouldn't have happened. But because of a refusal to stand up against evil, and instead we actually celebrate that, but because of that refusal to stand up against evil, others got hurt. And then we celebrate that. It's a weakness. But the herd looks at it as, calls it a virtue. It says, oh, that's so wonderful that you would exercise such restraint like that. And you're going to notice that even as I talk about this, we're laughing at that because we realize that's what we're supposed to do, that's what's being imposed on us, but we also realize instinctively that's not the way that things should be going down. This is one of the ways in which society uses its power to pressure you into not being what you are, to kind of push down those things. And then, of course, if you act out, society will then act out against you with the law, with rules and suspensions and stuff like that, until we finally just kind of go along with it, which is exactly what the herd instinct and the herd morality is attempting to do, to force you to go along with the things that you instinctively know are incorrect. So what's the response to that? Well, solitude. First and foremost, solitude. That's how it is that you become this higher man. So you need to separate yourself from that. In so doing, we understand that because the weak masses arrange themselves around our weaknesses, even to support it, even to the point of creating a need for each other. In other words, it self-perpetuates. We create a society that self-perpetuates itself by further creating the need for each other. I'm sure you've heard stuff before. It takes a village. We all need each other, that kind of thing. But it doesn't just create a system of support. It creates a system of dependence for all of us, to depend on each other, to need each other. So what happens? Well, the higher man is the person who separates themselves from that and dares to become all things to themselves. So what happens when you go out into solitude, as we were saying before? When you start asking those deeper questions in life. Why am I alive? What's my purpose here? What's my meaning? The kinds of things that we don't necessarily do, especially when there are people around. Any of you guys ever tried having a deep conversation with certain people, and there's just no deep conversation to be had there? You ask a question, and then say, oh, I don't know, man, you're thinking too much. You know, or somebody will give you an answer, like you might ask, like, why are we alive? And people will say, I think that we're alive because, like, you know, we're all dying. Or something stupid like that. And then we're supposed to then go, wow, that's deep. And we go, really? That makes sense to you? Oh, dude, that's just my opinion, man. You have to get all over me about it. Yeah, whatever, you think too much. You know, people want to just kind of espouse things without having to defend them. I'm sure we all know people like this. You know, in fact, just go on Instagram, it's all over the place. You know? But the higher man is the person who dares to ask those deep questions in life and pursues the answers. So, for example, when we ask that question, you know, why are we alive? Nietzsche would say, there is no objective reason for your existence. You just are. Well, then, what's the purpose in all of it? Nietzsche would say, there is no purpose in it, except the purpose that you can discover for yourself. Does this sound familiar? This is Frankl. Frankl says that the meaning and purposes that we find in life are the things that we discover for ourselves. Now, I can't tell you what it is, you have to discover it. But you're not going to discover it unless you go into a place of solitude and separate yourselves out. So how is it that we're able to distinguish between good and evil, he might say? All these kinds of deeper questions. So Nietzsche points out that for us to exist, we have to believe that we have a purpose to our suffering. That we're not just suffering for no reason. So we've got two choices, by the way. One, we suffer for no reason. Secondly, we suffer for a reason. If you suffer for a reason, you find a purpose. If you suffer for no reason, no purpose. Now start to look at what those two lives look like. If you have a why to your suffering, you can survive anyhow. Don't miss that. If you have a why to your suffering, you can survive anyhow. You know? Some of you guys have parents who absolutely hate their jobs, and you might look at them and be like, man, why don't you just quit then? Why don't they quit? Because they're taking care of you. They're doing what they think they have to in order to take care of you. Do you think that they like waking up every day and going and pursuing a job or a career that was never their dream in the first place? But they do what they have to do because they feel this need to transcend the suffering and to live and work for you, to make your life better. Even if you think that they don't like you, or even if you aren't getting along, there's something that's deep inside of them that motivates them to be those things, to do those things. Well, what's the other side? Well, the other side is possibly, well, there is no meaning to your suffering. So if there's no meaning to your suffering, then there's no meaning to life. And that's where you run into this thing called nihilism. Nihilism is the idea that it's the belief that everything lacks meaning. Nihilism is the belief that everything lacks meaning. Your suffering, your life, your emotions, everything of your life lacks meaning. This is nihilism. And then, of course, that leads to some really ugly ends in life. Because if nothing matters, then nothing matters. Should you get better today? Doesn't matter. You know? Should you work hard? Doesn't matter. Should I quit? Should I kill myself? Doesn't matter. You know? This is when Nietzsche declares the death of God. He comes along and says God is dead. Now, Nietzsche is a savage critic of Christianity, but he doesn't say God is dead with any kind of glee or celebration. He says God is dead as a very negative thing, because whether you're religious or not is immaterial. The point is that especially Western civilization is founded on top of this structure of Judeo-Christian values. In other words, that's the thing that has propelled Western civilization for 2,000 years, well, 2,500 years. 3,000 years, I guess you could say. And so when you come along and say, okay, all of our values, all of our culture, everything is based on this foundation, when you then go in and you pull that foundation from underneath it and say, good luck, oh, by the way, there's no truth. And then you walk away from that, well, what do you end up with? Well, you end up with chaos. You end up with this big void. And what do we fill that void with? Well, geez Louise, you guys tell me, because that's the world that you're living in right now, of nihilism. Nothing matters. Everything is, nothing matters at all. And what does that lead to? I was looking, I think it was just yesterday, I saw this bumper sticker on someone's car. You know how they have like Biden 2020 or Trump 2020. This person had a bumper sticker that says, I think it was exactly what it said, but it says something like "Death Asteroid 2020." Cheering for the idea that maybe an asteroid will just hit us and take us out. Well, geez, of course you might think that. If your life has no meaning, if you think that there's no meaning to anything. Earlier this year, there's an asteroid that missed the Earth. It came relatively close to us. It came between us and the moon. And I saw these comments online and all these people posting saying, "Oh man, maybe next time." It's funny, but it reveals something about the character of people who think things like that. That's the kind of person you sit there and you look at and you say, "Oh man, I'm glad they don't have their fingers on the button." Because one thing that we learned from the Holocaust is what man is capable of. And one thing that we learned from Hiroshima is what's at stake, if you recall from Frankel. So if we really think that about the world, about people, I hope you never end up with your finger on the button.